Hi, welcome to a special edition Education Matters. This is part of our Parent Connection page. My name is Ray Pinney. I'll be your host for this program. Today we'll be talking about school funding and property taxes with Chris Jones. Chris Jones is a legislative advocate for NJSBA's governmental relations. Welcome, Chris.
Thank you. Glad to be here.
Chris, our public schools are funded in from three major sources. Can you explain who those sources are?
Sure. There's basically three pots of money that go into funding local schools. There's federal money, which is a relatively small pot, all things considered, and not terribly worth discussing right now. But the two main pots that money is taken from are state funds and local property taxes.
Most people know about the property taxes they pay, but it's not the same in every town because in every school district, because it depends on how much you get from the state.
Correct.
How does the state determine how it allocates its funds?
Well, basically what the state does is it sits down and figures out what it would cost per student to educate a single student when they factor in what it costs to pay for a teacher, pay for the textbooks, pay for technology, keep the lights on in the school, things of that nature. So they figure out a baseline cost for every single student. Then they take every student and they multiply it by how many students there are in the district, and that is how they derive what's called an adequate budget.
Two things. One, the share that the state puts out towards public education is very significant, isn't it?
Oh, correct, absolutely. It's over a third of the state budget. It's the only line item in the entire budget that's over $10 billion.
So it's the largest share of anything that they provide for municipalities and everything, and prisons and all that.
Correct, by a large margin.
Now, you indicated that there's an average that they cost for an adequate to educate a student. But there are other factors that drive that, like if students have language difficulties. What are some of those factors?
Sure. Well, added into that, when they derive the adequate budget, they also factor in a few different things. What type of school does the student go to? Is it an elementary school student, middle school student, a high school student? Because the older kids get, the more it costs to educate them. In addition to that, two other things are factored in, and that is whether or not they are what is considered at risk. And basically they determine that by whether or not they're enrolled in the free or reduced lunch program. The final factor they figure in is their English proficiency. If English is a second language to them, it's obviously going to cost a little more to educate them, so that is factored into to calculating the adequate budget as well.
So if a district has a high number of at-risk students, which are usually poorer students, and also students with language difficulties, they will receive generally more state aid.
Correct. Then there's also what is called categorical aid. And those are the things like what it costs for transportation, what it costs for security, special education, things of that nature. And those are calculated on top of the adequacy budget.
So once a district receives what they know is their state aid, and they usually know in general what area how much it's going to be, then they factor the rest comes from the property taxes.
Correct. The state ultimately, calculates how much they can afford to give in what is called equalization aid, how much they can afford to give each district towards what they have calculated to be their adequate budget. The remainder is made up by local property taxpayers on what is called the local share, and that is determined by the state looking at two factors: what the property is worth in the district and what the wealth is of the people that live in the district is.
So if I'm a parent and I'm in my town, that's why some towns have higher property tax, pay more from their fair share through property taxes than other districts because of district factors.
Correct, exactly. In addition to that, districts can choose to go beyond what the state has said is their local fair share. If they feel the need to pay even more to get the best teachers in the district, to have an additional program that most other districts don't have in neighboring towns, that's their prerogative. But you get what you pay for. So if they want to get better services, they're going to have higher property taxes to pay for those services.
And finally, the funding formula, there's a formula that calculates all this. Is that looked at every year? Or is that something that the legislature has to pass?
The funding formula, it was originally established back in 2008 through the School Funding Reform Act, SFRA. But what is also factored in is how much the state has to pay towards that. So what the state can often do, depending on the level of funds they have available, is they are the ultimate determinant of the local fair share. So if they have less resources, they can play with the numbers somewhat to say that a district has higher property values than it previously had, higher wealth has moved into the district than they previously had, and that can be changed year to year.
I probably am remiss. There is a 2% cap, and that cap is on the amount a district can raise the property taxes.
Correct.
In their district.
Correct.
All right. I'd like to thank Chris Jones for joining me. That brings us to a conclusion of this special edition of Education Matters, dealing with school funding and property taxes. If you have any questions on school funding or property taxes, you can contact either Chris or myself. Our email addresses are on the screen below, and I look forward to hearing from you. Thank you.